Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack for Business podcast. Over 390 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game.
From an audience perspective, are you wasting your time trying to convince the wrong people to buy into your company culture and burning out in the process? Jim will explain his rule of thirds strategy, a powerful approach that helps business owners stop pouring energy into resistance and start leading change by activating the right people. If you've ever felt stuck trying to shift your team culture, this episode will give you a smarter, more sustainable way forward. Our guest today is Jim Salvucci from Guidance for Greatness. Dr. Salvucci brings a wealth of knowledge and experience from his 30-year career as an English professor, school dean, and university vice president, now refocused on empowering leaders in the corporate world. As a former C-suite higher education executive, Dr. Salvucci has mastered leadership as both a discipline and a practice, teaching leaders and emerging professionals how to align their values with their organizational mission. His expertise in writing, communication, and leadership coaching, combined with certifications from Thrive, Tiny Habits, and Harvard's Institute for Management and Leadership, makes his approach uniquely impactful. With a passion for lifelong learning and a mission to help leaders live their values, Dr. Salvucci equips professionals with the tools to drive personal, professional, and organizational transformation. Dr. Salvucci, or Jim, as we're going to call you from now on, welcome back. And do you have a favorite quote or saying, sir?
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I'm going to actually start with a little caveat. I just told Bernie and Wayne that I am exhausted. I just moved all week. Hopefully I don't ramble on too much, but I'm really excited to be here.
So I noticed you have a book that's out, and we're just going to touch on that a little bit. Jim, where can people find this book?
It's on Amazon, Greater Than Great. You can look under my name, Jim Salvucci, or you can look under the title. It's a leadership book, a series of 30 essays. Most of the reviewers have said it's highly readable. You can get it on Kindle, paperback, and we're about to come out with a hardcover version. Soon I'll be working on an Audible version as well.
Fantastic. Both Wayne and I have read the book. And in fact, it is readable, and there are really good stories inside there. So what is the rule of thirds in leadership? What's that all about? Walk me through that. It sounds like the secret of handshake and a wink and a nudge. Tell us about the story.
Cool name, right? But it's a little bit misleading. It really should be called the rule of threes. It just doesn't sound as cool. The rule of thirds is about how to affect positive change in a culture, in a group. It usually kicks in when the group's around 20 or so, could be less. Groups tend to fall into three categories, the members of the group. And they're not actually thirds, which is why the name's a little misleading. The numbers can vary, the percentages, the proportions can vary, but there tend to be three groups. I actually developed this idea from my teaching when I was a college professor. I discovered this was happening in the classroom, and I learned where to direct my energy as a result. I didn't really think about it formally until I became a dean and then a vice president at universities. I started thinking how to apply what I learned as a teacher to my leadership. And so the rule of thirds developed from that. Essentially what it is, there's three groups. There's one group that I call the true believers. These are the people who really buy into what you're saying and naturally go along with you. There's another group I call the recalcitrants. These people are the opposite. They're against all change, against whatever's happening. They're negative drags in the culture. The more dysfunctional the culture, the larger that group will be. And then there's what I call the muddy middlers. Those are the people on the continuum between the recalcitrants and the true believers. They can land anywhere in between there. And they're the most highly changeable people. They're sort of fungible, right? They could become recalcitrants or true believers. And so those are the people you want to bring along and buy into your culture. The rule of thirds has leaders focus on the top group, not the bottom. People tend to want to bring along the recalcitrants when there's a change coming or when, people are a drag on the culture. You want to get those. You figure if I work with the worst of the worst, if I can bring them along, I get everyone. Problem is you end up losing the top half. The middlers and the true believers feel neglected. And if you put your energy at the top, you can actually recruit those people as your lieutenants to help you bring everybody else along. That's the rule of thirds in a nutshell.
As a manager, in your case, as a university professor, you made this desire to want to fix the problem. You could train them, you could educate them, you could equip them, you could let them know. What was the process before? I don't need to do this anymore. My head hurts. I'm going to stop banging it.
So I think what you're asking is, how did I come to this, right? It's really simple. I came to it by screwing up. When I was a professor, I was told, starting out, make sure you're teaching to everyone in the classroom. And there's going to be people who are really into learning, and there's going to be people who are resistant. And make sure you're teaching to that bottom half. You want to bring them along. And there is an imperative to do that. So when you're teaching, it's a little bit different in the classroom than the workplace. You can't fire your students per se. But I learned by teaching to that bottom portion that the top portion was bored, disengaged, annoyed, not feeling honored for their effort. It became untenable. It wasn't a good situation then. They weren't learning. And neither was the bottom portion. I was wasting a lot of time trying to engage them, trying to win them over. So what I started doing was, I didn't teach just to the top portion. I didn't teach over everybody's head, but I made it desirable to be in that top group more than just grades, like a cultural thing. Being in that top group makes you feel good, and you want to feel good in the classroom. That doesn't win over a lot of the recalcitrants, but those people in the middle who could go either way, it wins them over. That's what I learned. That's how I came to this. This was largely intuitive, right? Over years, this evolved. It wasn't until I became a hired executive that I started thinking about how to move faculty and staff along, how to get them to buy in. And I started noticing it was the same pattern. And then I applied the same techniques.
So the folks in the middle that can weather vane left or right, when you go to change the culture in the company, and I'm going to assume it's almost like if you have a bell curve, but you're shifting the bell curve to the positive end, the positive spectrum where you want it to be. Is that a fast thing? Is that a slow thing? Is that size dependent? Does size matter? Or is it like you got three people and you got one that's ticked off with you, one that's like, yeah, maybe. And the other one's like, oh, baby. And then you're trying to shift them over.
Yeah, there's no absolutes here in terms of speed or approach, because it's cultural, right? It can vary wildly. It probably wouldn't be three people. Like I said, it really kicks in 20, maybe 15 people, right? You start seeing this pattern emerge. It could be smaller though. The speed is really dependent on who the leader is, how dug in the middlers are, right? Are they kind of committed to being in the middle? How good the true believers are, and the culture you're trying to build. I encountered this a lot when I inherited cultures, right? And that was really where I could affect change. I came into a new position as a vice president at a new university, or even when I became a dean, I inherited faculty. I was a founding dean, and I had to cobble together faculty from all these different departments to create a school. So I inherited the people. I didn't get to choose them as an absolute. So the culture kind of was existing in its own way, and I was affecting the change. It was a little bit slower than I would like, and most change in higher ed is glacial, but a lot faster than most change in higher ed, because the people in the middle often really just wanted to see a way to become true believers. And so it happened, for me fairly quickly. But you really have to concentrate on getting those true believers to truly buy into what you're doing and let them know what you're doing. The transparency is key here too. Directness.
You said that the middling really wants to be taught to be a believer. Tell me that again. I like to hear it again.
Yeah, they're in the middle because they don't want to be recalcitrants. Think of the recalcitrants as the jerks of the workplace, right? These are the people that you'll be like, I'd rather not have them around. They don't want to be like that. And so when you honor them, when you hear them, when you recognize them for being people who can change and become better, and you put energy into that, by and large, they want to excel. They just need that reward. And I'm not talking carrot and stick. I'm talking about the sort of intangible reward of you want them. You're making it clear you want them to be true believers.
How do you know
when you've actually lost your believers? What's that sense in the universe that you've actually sent them away accidentally?
Your true believers, everything sucks. It's a horrible place to be. I mean, you're deep in dysfunction. You're probably not a very effective leader, and you're going to have a really hard time from now on. Your culture is toxic. But if you get to that point, you probably need to rethink your entire approach to leadership, and you may want to move on.
How do you reset something like that? Can you come back from that? Is there any hope, or you're just looking at, you know what, like module, this part ain't working well. It was a wrong connection. Not that the person is wrong per se, but it's a wrong fit.
Yeah, it is recoverable, but it would take a lot of introspection and self-honesty, right? You would have to be very clear with yourself that this is not working, that you need to adjust things, and you are going to consciously try to build a culture that will engage people, that will bring them along. You want to focus on your values, and you want to get people there who agree with those values. The only way it's recoverable in any true sense, if you've truly lost the true believers, is probably by hiring new true believers, bring them in from the outside, which is incredibly hard. But I would say that if you're in that situation and it's not one you inherited, you're part of the problem, and it really starts with you.
Would that be just someone coming in green? I could say a startup company, and they're going, I'm really good at making a product. Let's say they're an artist, right? And they're really good at doing something. Different movies about fashion. The boss really has that chic sense of taste and knowing where the population is. But when you watch the movie unfold, as the movie unfolds, this person's a really ugly human being, at least how they, their interactions with other folks. How do you cause that? Adjust your head a little bit. You'll be better off. You'll have a longer life and everybody will be happier. And
leadership starts with self-awareness. And that self-awareness is twofold. Part of it is your own analysis. You can do a personality test or something like that. I'm not a big fan of personality tests, but they work largely because it's you telling yourself who you are, but also finding out who you are through other people, either by directly soliciting them in some safe environment where they can be honest, or just carefully observing how people behave around you. If you walk into a room and everybody's talking and they clam up the second you set foot in the room, you might want to think about done to cause that situation, and that needs to change. So like all leadership, it starts with self-awareness.
Some recalcitrants are also cowards. They will tell everybody in the room what they think about Dr. Jim, but they don't tell Dr. Jim. What are the tells that you have a recalcitrant on your team?
Oh, they can vary, but they're usually the people who are least engaged. They're the last ones to volunteer and the first ones to throw bombs. They're the ones who show up to the meeting late or just on time, or show up real early and pissed off the whole time. When I first became a dean, like I said, I had to cobble together all these different departments. And I had 3 faculty members, all older than me, who had been there longer than I had at that university. And their names all started with A, so I called them 3 A's. 2 of them we'd have, like, I can't remember how often we met, maybe once a month or a couple times a semester. I'd bring together my whole school. I had 30-some faculty, and I put them in a big, have tables arranged in a giant square, so we were all facing each other and could have conversations. That's how I was trying to build the culture in this very open room with all this glass. It was very symbolic. And 2 of these A's started coming in, and during the meeting would open a book and read during the meeting. Why were they doing this? With signal was that they were too smart for any of this, and they were more dedicated to their teaching and scholarship than to this bureaucratic nonsense of meeting and building a culture, which of course is idiocy. They were part of the culture and extremely dysfunctional parts of the culture, and they dragged everybody else down. And so what do you think I did? I'm going to ask you, Bernie and Wayne, what do you think I did in reaction to these guys reading in the meetings?
I'm going to suspect, if you're not trying to have an adversarial moment, because if you have, it's not to put your thumb on them. It's to have them offer some sagely advice or an opinion that makes them give an opportunity to look good, or it's their choice. They live by the sword or perish and cleanse themselves on top of the sword. And I'm going to hazard the guess that, unless of course you're not looking to retire that moment, they'll offer something positive or neutral.
That's a good guess. Wayne?
I will tell you how I do it. Do you have something interesting you're reading you can share with the group? Not saying that's the right thing, but that's what I would do.
I did nothing. I did absolutely nothing. I didn't say a word. I didn't acknowledge them in any way, shape, or form. I had tried in the past, Bernie, just so you know, I had tried actually engaging them like that. They were onto that trick. And it just shut down. They didn't start out reading. This is maybe 2 meetings in or something. They just started playing this game. I decided not to call them out like that, Wayne, because these guys were accomplished pot stirrers. I just gave a TEDx talk a few weeks ago and I was talking about pot stirrers. These are people who just cause chaos. If you engage them in a way that gives them any sense they can act out, they're going to cause problems. By reading the book, they were drawing attention to themselves and people were looking at them awkwardly. By ignoring them, they became irrelevant, which is what they didn't want. Now, I happen to know these 2 clowns from when I was a faculty member, so I knew what drove them. They wanted to be relevant, important, recognized, and honored. And I wasn't going to give them that because they had nothing to be honored for. They were acting like children, passing notes. So I did nothing. And by doing that, everyone started ignoring me. The second time they did this, a few very new faculty members, young, 20-something, gung-ho, all, bright-eyed, bushy-tail faculty members, actually came up to me and said, why aren't you doing anything about them reading? I said, tell me this, would you ever act like that? No. Why not? Because they look like jerks. And I said, that's why. And they went, oh. I was teaching the younger faculty not to be like that. These people look like jerks. They're acting like jerks. Nobody's paying any attention to them anymore. And this went away maybe 3-4 times they did this, and then they stopped doing it. And then they actually became a little more engaged in the meetings. One of them stopped becoming a recalcitrant. He moved to the middle. One of the 3, the other 2 stayed recalcitrants and good riddance right through the bitter end. But I didn't want to give them that. So I gave them nothing, absolutely nothing. And that's when I learned the disciplinary tool of taking away people's toys too. When someone has something they really like in the workplace, and I'm not talking this physical object, but like one of the guys used to run this really bad conference every year that involved like 3 students. It was a waste of time and money on the campus. And I just stopped him. I told him he can't do it anymore. I said, you're not allowed to do it anymore. We're not funding that. Tough cookies. And that made him feel important. This is the one who moved to the middle. He got that message loud and clear. I did that with a few people. But yeah, don't indulge it. Don't indulge it.
It almost sounds like the key element here is ego, their ego and your ego.
Mhm.
And, it's like, I spit in your face. No, I spit in your face. And it goes back and forth, the tit-to-tat. And it's like, one is when kudos to ignoring it because you're not adding fuel to a fire that doesn't need to be. That's really interesting. Do you find that depending on the task, people will come together, on a mundane, typically what we would consider mundane, everything will be fine. But if the house is on fire, everybody rallies. So if you've had the 2 A's, you're gonna have to remember that expression. Hey, I've got 2 A's over here. No, I've got 3. Hang on. I'll see you with another 4th A. But do you find that people rally when there's a critical circumstance that imperil everybody?
I mean, recalcitrant. Sometimes they're the ones who started the fire. I had 3 A's. It was just 2 of them to pull this stunt. But yeah, they're often the ones who start a fire. Sometimes they're the ones who fan the flames. Sometimes they're the ones who throw fuel on it. Sometimes they're the ones who get in front of the fire truck so it can't pull in. Yeah, I mean, I've seen that plenty of times. Sometimes people like that will also just kind of go away. But I've rarely seen recalcitrants step it up in a crisis. Rarely.
You mentioned TED Talks. They're an amazingly powerful tool. And every now and again, you see someone who is great. As a speaker, walk me through. I want to do a TED Talk. It's more than a whim. I'll practice. I'll apply. Walk me through wanting to do a TED Talk to doing a TED Talk. That's like 80 steps. Walk me through it.
First off, TED is invitation only. TEDx you apply for. And there's dozens of these every year all over the world of various sorts. Some are geared toward youth, some of them are particular to a university, that kind of thing. A lot of time they're community-based. They present a theme. You apply and present the theme, and the way they vet you can vary wildly. I worked with a coach in Canada, Bobby Umar, Umar. And if people are interested, look up Bobby, tell them I sent you. Tell Bobby you learned of this through me. He's a wonderful coach with this. He's presented TEDx several times. He's turned down invitations to do TEDx, but he really knows this process, and it's all soup to nuts. A lot of it is starting off with your life story, because it's what makes TEDx so powerful is that you're telling the story, and ideally that story is personal, or a piece of the TEDx talk is personal. And so Bobby starts you by he has you write an outline of your life, a bullet point outline. Mine was 38 pages, which he was a little put off by, but I went into great detail. He identified things that could be used in a TEDx talk, and one of those became my TEDx talk. It might even become the theme for my next book. It's a really powerful process, especially working with a coach like that. And it was group coaching, so we're also working together with other people, helping each other out. And then you apply, and how you apply and what the process is from there can vary wildly. My application, I didn't present a topic. I had to answer some questions in a video, and they auditioned me to see if I could do a TED Talk before I even proposed a TED Talk. Other places you have to go, you have to get the proposal through, and then they'll kind of audition you.
When you're communicating as a leader, one of the things we've heard from previous podcast guests, you always frame your conversation to your audience. So if you're dealing with finance, you talk finance. You're dealing with tech, you talk tech speak. When you're a tech person trying to convince a finance person, you don't do tech speak, you talk finance speak. And usually there's kind of an interloper in between to help do the universal translator mode. Do you find that some people either acquire the skill, or they have to have another person, perhaps a coach, to help shape the communication so that it flows better?
Both, right? People are different. Some people are natural communicators. They're good at surmising. They're often very good listeners too, which is a big part of communication. They're good at surmising what their audience needs. I think the last time I was on, I talked about the 3 elements of communication, which are: you need a message that's values-based, it's worth delivering. You need to be clear, which is the most important thing. But you also need to have a known and willing audience as best as possible, right? Like here right now, I don't know exactly who's listening, but I assume it's somebody who's interested in this topic. I know something about the audience, and they're willing because they're still listening, and please continue to listen. But, that's important too. So that's where those last 2 pieces, the clarity and knowing your audience, that's where adjusting for different types of audiences, use your example, tech to finance, finance to tech. That's where that comes in. That's a skill that can be developed individually or with a coach. Some people might need a coach, but it's definitely developable.
And what you teach and what you've learned, what are the blind spots in leadership that everyone trips over, perhaps even you did 20 years ago, that you can share with us?
I think Bernie said it earlier, ego. I have a saying, ego is the biggest obstacle. That self-awareness helps you get rid of that. No one eliminates it entirely. In fact, if you did, you'd be dead. I have a saying, take your ego in a sack and throw it in the river. The good news is you won't drown it. It'll be a little soggy. It might be a little humbled, but it will instantly be back. Your ego won't go anywhere. Don't worry about it. But you need to kind of suppress your ego. You need to say, hey, it's not about me. If you're a leader and you think it's about you, you're not a leader, you're a boss. It is not personal. I cannot emphasize this enough. If you ever worked for someone who takes everything personally, you're working for a really crappy boss. You see what's going on there, and it's all ego. You can see this playing out in national politics or international politics. You see this focus on the ego, on I've got to present myself in a certain way. I'm a leader. I should act a certain way and look a certain way and be a certain way because I'm the boss. That's the biggest hitch. And that one is totally surmountable if you're not pathological. You can work on that, and you should work on that. And that is something you need to practice every moment of every day.
I live in a university town, and university people speak university jargon. And my wife worked in the university, and the language was not the guy in the Ford pickup. But your book is approachable without having a bachelor's degree. How did that happen? How did you speak to the non-academic?
Great question. By screwing up, there's two types of professors, ones who focus primarily on research, ones who focus primarily on teaching, and ones who are kind of a hybrid, right? You go to a large research institution, you're talking about Queen's University in Canada. That's a pretty big research institution. Most Canadian institutions are focused on research over teaching. When you live in that world, your entire world is what you study. That's what you've done for decades. That's why you were hired. That's why you got tenure. That's why you're rewarded. Everything is that. That's why you have trouble talking to normal people. People who aren't in that field can't even talk to each other sometimes. That's not a character flaw, because it's literally the world they live in. I was a teacher primarily. When you're teaching, I mean, I used to teach like way up here, like way up high, and my students were just baffled. That doesn't mean I dumbed it down, but I found ways to make what I was saying more approachable. When I did dumb it down, that didn't work at all. When I was teaching to the recalcitrant students, that didn't work at all, because nobody came along with that. I tried to keep everything at a very high level and have very high expectations of my students, but I also gave them framework and scaffolding to bring them up to where they needed to be. There's some teachers, particularly in the sciences, particularly in biology, at various institutions, they sort of teach way up high and they say to the students, jump. If you make it and the rest drop out, you're no longer bio majors, they're getting bad grades, they're not going to med school, whatever it is. The problem with that is those people who jumped were ones who could have actually taught themselves, as usually left them alone with a book in a room. My goal as a teacher was always to bring as many students as possible up, not to dumb anything down. How can I get them to that bar I wanted them to reach and give them the tools? So that has infected my writing. The way I write as I speak is very direct. I'm often told I'm a straight talker, whatever that means. And that is the way I communicate, because that's what I had to train myself to do, an effective teacher. And I wasn't a great teacher, by the way. I really wasn't.
Do you find that there's a particular industry that's in true dire need of understanding this, or is it universal and some particular companies get it? Other companies, same industry, they're in dire need of, tweaking.
The answer is yes. Suppose it can vary from company to company, industry to industry. Can I name an industry that needs this desperately? Higher education. Desperately, horrible communicators, internal and external, which is why they're in so much trouble in the United States right now. I mean, some of it's, from the outside, but they've opened themselves up to that because they haven't been good at communicating. They're called elite, right? And they are elite, but there's ways of being elite without being elite, if you know what I mean. There's ways of doing elite things, but not talking down to people and not isolating people and, being a closed system. Higher ed needs to learn to communicate better. Higher ed in the United States, and I believe in Canada as well, is in a leadership crisis, which is why I'm no longer in higher ed. I refuse to participate.
So what you're basically saying is if you act like a snob, everything's beneath you, you'll never win support from those that you need. Okay. All right. That makes pretty straightforward. When you're starting out or you're a freelancer or you're dealing with contractors, how do you manage that? Because, if you have a student, you have some sway over their universe. If you have an employee, it's wages. How do you hold sway over other people? How you communicate, like even us talking right now, you're a guest, Quinn and I are hosts, but how do we hold sway and do it well if we're starting out?
Yeah. First off, this is so important. If I haven't emphasized it enough, forget them. Unless they're actually causing damage, right? They're dysfunctional, sabotaging things, bullies, something like that. Don't worry about them. Don't try to win them over. And if they're doing that other stuff, get rid of them or isolate them. I was dealing with people with tenure, so I would isolate them. But when it comes to contractors or freelancers, you've got all kinds of sway. Don't hire them. or don't hire them again. You're not stuck with them and you have tremendous sway over them. If they're not doing what you want, get rid of them. So you would have to have a fair number of contractors and freelancers interacting to create a culture. I can imagine a scenario where even a solopreneur might have a situation like that. The rule of thirds strategy is really a culture change strategy. If they're recalcitrant, get rid of them.
A large group of our listeners bring up that they'd like to write a book. And 9 times out of 10, that's where that stops. And one thing that as far as I'm an author, but one thing that I want to deal with is you have 30 essays, quite proud of 30 essays that aren't technically a book when you start out with this great overview, and yet you made it readable and approachable and doable, and you had the subject matter. How do you deal with people that think they have to write the fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged to get the thoughts down on paper?
Yeah, first off, I love writing. Okay, if we weren't having this conversation right now, I'd be writing. That's one of my favorite things. I write a weekly blog and podcast. I do an essay every week, which was the genesis of all the essays in the book. All of those originated as a blog piece that I also read as a podcast. A lot of them were changed pretty heavily for a variety of reasons for the book, but that's where I started. So at this point, I've been doing this for 4.5 years. I've got like 250 essays that I can choose from. I went through the essays a long time ago and categorized them into 4 categories. When I was selecting essays for the book, I just got a healthy dose of each category. The book is divided into 4 sections, and those are the 4 categories. There's a lot of essays I would love to have included. I didn't. There's a couple I included. They're not my favorite essays, but I thought the information was important. I thought what I was saying linked up with other essays really well. A lot of it was just being systematic, but how do you start? By starting. There's no other way. Start writing for yourself. I wrote for myself for years and years and years. And then I just started writing, saying, well, I'm going to put this out in a blog and see what happens. And nobody came and arrested me or beat me up or anything. When I realized that I wasn't going to be physically harmed by doing it, I continued.
So after you bought that book, Greater Than Great, and you want to find out more from Dr. Jim, how do we get a hold of you?
One thing you could do is you can go to my website, guidance4greatness.com, which is easy enough, all one word. You can look me up. You can email me directly, jim@jimsalvucci.com. You could also look up my Substack, which is jimsalvucci.substack.com. And my Substack's called On Leading with Greatness. The word great comes up a lot in my stuff. I guess that's my brand. And those would be 3 key ways to do it.
I want to say thank you to Jim Salvucci, my co-host Wayne Pratt, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. If you're finding this intriguing, if you're finding you want to know more about the book, it is Greater Than Great. It's on Amazon. The details of the link will be in the show notes. What? Jim spent years trying to lead through persuasion alone until he realized he was giving his best energy to those least open to change. That shaped everything for him. And, that's where you're getting out of the book. That's where you're getting out of connecting with Jim. And so reach out to him and better yet, buy the book.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREVINSIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter u.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner, and Wayne Pratt from Motive 8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer, please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.